The radiation detector screams as Captain Nikolai Zateyev approaches the reactor compartment of Soviet nuclear submarine K-19. It's October 27, 1962. His vessel lurks 300 feet beneath the Atlantic Ocean, just 90 miles from American destroyers enforcing the naval blockade of Cuba. Behind the sealed bulkhead door, the submarine's nuclear reactor is melting down. Coolant pressure has dropped to zero. Core temperature is rising toward critical mass. If the reactor explodes, the nuclear blast will vaporize his 139-man crew and provide President Kennedy with justification for immediate nuclear strikes against the Soviet Union. 8 sailors have volunteered to enter the reactor compartment without protective equipment. They know it's a death sentence, but if they fail to restore cooling, K-19 becomes a nuclear weapon that triggers World War III. The Hotel-class nuclear submarine K-19 represented the pinnacle of Soviet naval technology in 1962. Built at Severodvinsk shipyard under Project 627A, the vessel stretched 377 feet in length and displaced 5,000 tons submerged. Its VMA pressurized water reactor generated 70 megawatts of thermal power, driving the submarine to speeds exceeding 30 knots underwater. K-19 carried 16 R-13 ballistic missiles, each armed with a 1-megaton nuclear warhead capable of striking American cities from Caribbean patrol areas. The submarine's mission during the Cuban Missile Crisis was critical: establish a forward nuclear deterrent position while Soviet medium-range missiles deployed in Cuba faced American demands for removal. Captain Nikolai Zateyev, a veteran of 147 submarine patrols, commanded a crew trained for nuclear warfare against the United States Navy. Construction problems plagued K-19 from its first sea trials in 1960. Welding defects in the primary cooling system created microscopic cracks that allowed radioactive coolant to leak into crew compartments. The reactor's emergency cooling system failed repeatedly during testing, forcing engineers to install backup pumps that operated at marginal capacity. Soviet Naval Command ignored these defects, desperate to deploy nuclear submarines capable of matching American Polaris missile boats. Shipyard workers called K-19 Hiroshima due to persistent radiation leaks that exposed construction crews to dangerous doses during final assembly. By October 1962, the submarine had experienced 17 separate reactor incidents, including 2 emergency shutdowns that nearly caused meltdowns. Fleet headquarters classified all reports, maintaining the fiction that Soviet nuclear submarines operated flawlessly. On October 14, 1962, American U-2 reconnaissance aircraft photographed Soviet missile sites under construction in Cuba, triggering the most dangerous crisis of the Cold War. President Kennedy demanded immediate removal of all offensive weapons from the island, while Soviet Premier Khrushchev insisted the missiles provided defensive protection against American invasion. As diplomatic tensions escalated, both superpowers activated their nuclear forces. The Soviet Navy ordered 4 Foxtrot-class diesel submarines and 2 Hotel-class nuclear boats to establish patrol positions around Cuba. K-19 received classified orders on October 23 to proceed at maximum speed to coordinates 90 miles northeast of Havana, where American naval forces were concentrating for possible invasion. Captain Zateyev's mission was to launch nuclear missiles against the eastern seaboard if American forces attacked Soviet installations in Cuba. The submarine's reactor problems began during the high-speed transit to Cuban waters. On October 25, vibrations from sustained maximum power operation caused stress fractures in cooling system pipes already weakened by construction defects. Primary coolant pressure began dropping gradually as radioactive water leaked into the engine room bilges. K-19's nuclear engineer, Lieutenant Boris Korchalov, reported the pressure loss to Captain Zateyev at 0400 hours on October 26. Initial attempts to isolate the leak failed when backup pumps proved inadequate to maintain circulation. The reactor's automatic safety systems activated, inserting control rods to slow the nuclear reaction. But decay heat from radioactive fuel continued generating enormous temperatures that required constant cooling to prevent meltdown. By 1200 hours on October 27, K-19's situation had become critical. Primary coolant pressure dropped to 15% of normal operating levels. Reactor core temperature climbed toward 1,500 degrees Celsius, the melting point of uranium fuel assemblies. Emergency cooling pumps operated at maximum capacity, but could not compensate for the massive coolant leak in the primary system. Captain Zateyev ordered the submarine to emergency surface, hoping to use diesel generators to power additional cooling pumps. But K-19 surfaced directly into the path of American destroyer USS Randolph, which immediately detected the Soviet submarine on radar. The American warship approached at flank speed, prepared to depth charge what appeared to be a hostile submarine violating the quarantine zone. The reactor emergency reached maximum crisis at 14:30 hours. Core temperature exceeded 1,000 degrees Celsius as coolant flow dropped to emergency minimums. Steam pressure in the reactor compartment spiked beyond design limits, threatening to rupture the primary containment vessel. If containment failed, superheated radioactive steam would flood the submarine's hull, killing the entire crew within minutes. Worse, the reactor itself might achieve critical mass, creating a nuclear explosion equivalent to a 20-kiloton bomb. Captain Zateyev faced an impossible choice: abandon ship and allow K-19 to sink with its nuclear weapons intact, or attempt emergency repairs that would expose his crew to lethal radiation doses. Soviet naval regulations prohibited abandoning nuclear submarines under any circumstances due to security implications. 8 sailors volunteered for the suicide mission into the reactor compartment. Senior Petty Officer Boris Korchalov led the team, followed by nuclear technicians Vladimir Yemelyanov, Yuri Semyonov, Boris Rizhikov, Yuri Ordov, Anatoly Zaitsev, Nikolai Savchenko, and Viktor Pronyakin. None possessed adequate radiation protection equipment. K-19 carried only lightweight dosimeter badges and basic respirator masks. The men understood that entering the reactor space meant absorbing radiation doses exceeding 1,000 roentgens, enough to cause death within hours. Captain Zateyev personally briefed each volunteer, explaining that failure to restore cooling would result in reactor explosion and nuclear war. The sailors entered the reactor compartment at 1500 hours, carrying portable welding equipment and emergency coolant pumps. Working in rotating shifts of 15 minutes to limit radiation exposure, the 8-man team began emergency repairs in conditions that defied human endurance. Reactor compartment temperatures exceeded 140 degrees Fahrenheit, while radiation levels spiked to 18,000 roentgens per hour, enough to deliver a lethal dose in 3 minutes. The sailors worked by feel in near-total darkness, wearing heavy rubber gloves that made precise welding impossible. Steam from the overheated reactor created zero visibility, while radioactive water pooled ankle-deep on the compartment deck. Korchalov's team located the primary coolant leak in a 6-inch pipe junction near the reactor pressure vessel. The fracture extended completely around the pipe circumference, requiring emergency welding to seal the massive breach. As the repair team worked, K-19 remained surfaced under direct observation by American naval forces. USS Randolph maintained position 2,000 yards away, while additional destroyers converged on the Soviet submarine's location. American sonar operators detected unusual sounds from K-19's hull. The submarine's emergency pumps, operating at maximum capacity, created distinctive acoustic signatures. Intelligence analysts aboard the American vessels suspected mechanical problems, but could not determine the exact nature of K-19's distress. Captain Zateyev maintained radio silence to avoid revealing his submarine's critical condition. Any distress signal would alert American forces to the reactor emergency, potentially prompting immediate boarding action that could escalate into shooting war. The emergency welding operation continued for 3 hours as radiation exposure accumulated beyond survivable limits. Korchalov's team completed temporary repairs on the main coolant leak, but secondary fractures continued bleeding radioactive water throughout the reactor space. Emergency coolant pumps restored minimal circulation, dropping core temperature below the immediate danger zone. By 1800 hours, Reactor parameters stabilized sufficiently to prevent meltdown, but all 8 repair crew members had absorbed radiation doses exceeding 600 Roentgens. Military doctors later calculated that each man received enough exposure to cause death within 30 days. The volunteers continued working until emergency cooling systems operated independently, ensuring reactor safety even if additional failures occurred. Captain Zateyev ordered K-19 to submerge and withdraw from American patrol areas as the 8 irradiated sailors began showing symptoms of acute radiation sickness. Severe nausea, vomiting, and fever indicated cellular damage beyond medical treatment capabilities. The submarine's small medical facility lacked equipment for radiation therapy or even basic life support for multiple critically injured crew members. K-19's doctor, Lieutenant Pavel Leonov, administered morphine for pain relief while documenting radiation exposure levels that exceeded any previous submarine accident. The dying sailors remained conscious and alert, discussing their families and asking Captain Zateyev to ensure their sacrifice prevented nuclear war between their homeland and America. The submarine's emergency transit to Severodvinsk Naval Base required 8 days of underwater travel, while 8 men died slowly from radiation poisoning. Boris Korchalov succumbed first on October 30th, followed by Vladimir Yemelyanov and Yuri Semyonov within 48 hours. The remaining 5 volunteers survived until November 3 to 7 before radiation damage overwhelmed their immune systems. Captain Zateyev personally attended each death, recording final messages to families while maintaining operational security about the reactor incident. K-19 reached port on November 5, 1962, where radiation decontamination teams discovered contamination levels requiring complete reactor compartment replacement. The submarine remained in repair status for 2 years, while investigators determined the exact cause of cooling system failures. The K-19 reactor incident remained classified for 29 years as the Soviet Union concealed evidence of nuclear submarine safety problems from international observers. American intelligence agencies detected unusual radiation signatures from K-19's patrol area, but never determined that a reactor meltdown had occurred 90 miles from their naval blockade. The 8 sailors who died preventing nuclear explosion received no public recognition during the Soviet era. Their families were told the men died in a reactor accident without additional details. Official Soviet records listed the incident as a minor cooling system malfunction with no casualties. Not until 1991 did declassified documents reveal that K-19's reactor had nearly exploded during the most dangerous moment of the Cuban Missile Crisis. The heroism of K-19's crew extended far beyond preventing reactor meltdown. Their sacrifice eliminated a potential nuclear trigger that could have justified immediate American military action against the Soviet Union. If K-19's reactor had exploded, creating a nuclear blast visible to American surveillance aircraft and ships, President Kennedy would have faced enormous pressure to retaliate against Soviet missile sites in Cuba. The resulting escalation might have prompted Soviet nuclear strikes against American cities, fulfilling both superpowers' worst fears about the missile crisis. 8 sailors died to prevent this catastrophe, choosing certain death over the possibility of global nuclear war. The legacy of K-19's reactor crisis influenced Soviet nuclear submarine design and safety procedures for the remainder of the Cold War. Engineers redesigned primary cooling systems with redundant backup pumps and improved emergency repair equipment. Radiation protection gear became standard equipment on all nuclear vessels, while crew training emphasized reactor emergency procedures. The Soviet Navy established dedicated rescue vessels capable of providing medical treatment for radiation exposure victims. Most importantly, submarine commanders received authority to surface and request assistance during reactor emergencies, overriding previous regulations that prohibited revealing mechanical problems to potential enemies. The submarine that almost nuked Cuba demonstrated both the enormous risks and unexpected heroism of Cold War nuclear competition. K-19's reactor meltdown crisis occurred during the most dangerous 24 hours of the missile crisis when both superpowers stood on the brink of nuclear exchange. 8 Soviet sailors prevented catastrophe through individual courage that transcended national loyalty, choosing to save American lives as well as their own countrymen. Their sacrifice remained unknown to the world for 3 decades, but their actions may have prevented the nuclear war that both sides desperately sought to avoid. In the depths of the Cold War, humanity's survival sometimes depended on the courage of ordinary men willing to die for strangers.